Just days after declaring a state of emergency on democracy, civil rights leaders met with President Joe Biden. This is on the heels of him giving his State of Soul of the Nation speech, primetime speech. And civil rights leaders met with him after he delivered that speech. But I want to go into the room to see what was discussed, what the goal was, and where we are now. Well, one of those who's in that room is the Reverend Al Sharpton, president of National Action Network, and also host of MSNBC's Politics Nation. Rev, you are on the record. Thanks for joining me again.
Thank you for having me again, Ebony. Always glad for us to do these talks together.
There's some rooms where you just want to be a fly on the wall. Take us in. You're just hearing the president's Soul of the Nation speech. And now you're reading right after with the president on that next day. Take us into that room. What was the discussion and what were some of the goals you had going into that meeting?
What was interesting is that I had said there are 8 organizations that's been around for decades. National Action Network's one, NAACP, Urban League, National Council of Negro Women, Legal Defense Fund, Lawyers Committee, several of us, Leadership Conference on Civil Rights. And we all have been working together since the Obama administration as sort of the outside civil rights groups that would try to keep the policies in front of whoever was in the White House and the Senate. And I had said that this is the anniversary week, this is the week before the meeting of the March on Washington. We had not met with the president in several months. We need to meet with him on several of the agenda items. And we all agreed, asked for a meeting at the White House. They scheduled it for that Friday, but because of travel for some of us, we couldn't go, so they scheduled it for the next Friday. I'm giving you that background so you would know, Ebony, that we had no idea when they rescheduled it. It would be on the day after.
I was wondering about the date.
Yeah, it just fell in line. And, I'm a preacher, so I say that was providence because it just happened. So we go to the meeting, and we always organize, we get on Zoom call and say that what do we want to talk about? We want to talk about voting rights. We want to talk about our George Floyd bill in terms of criminal justice reform. We want to talk about infrastructure because Jackson, Mississippi, as we were meeting, was still going through and still is having tainted water with institutional neglect. And now that you passed an infrastructure bill, we want to talk about that. We want to talk about the inflation reduction bill that you passed and climate change as it relates to Black. And we all decided who was going to address this, who was going to address that. And we went in and met. In the room is the president, some of his staff, and the 8 of us, no staff with us. And I began the meeting, Mark Moriel, and then we went around the table. My concern was voting rights. Mr. President, you spoke last night, since we ended up providentially having this meeting, about the threat to democracy. But let's remember, Mr. President, democracy has always been different for Blacks than it has for other people. We had to fight to get the right to vote, fight to maintain the right to vote, had the Voting Rights Act in many ways gut taken out of it in 2013. And they're changing state laws now. The answer to protecting us was the John Lewis Voter Protection Act, which would have brought back our being able to have them have to comply with federal guidelines. We couldn't get the votes in the Senate because of 2 Democrats would not go along with the filibuster. If Blacks come out this midterm election, is my question, and we help you win, not only keep the Senate seats you have, which is 50, but get 2 or 3 more, which means we won't need Manchin and Sinema to break the filibuster. Will y'all put the bill back on the table? He said, yeah, I want that commitment. And I'm going to go around the country and say you commit. Second, in terms of the George Floyd bill, it never got past the House or the Senate. You did do an executive order, which is good, but the executive order goes out the door when you go out the door. And it only applies to federal law enforcement. If we get 2 or 3 more in the Senate, will you bring the George Floyd bill back? Yeah. Then I think it was Mark brought up, all right, the infrastructure bill. There's been disproportionate impact on Black communities and Black cities, from Flint, Michigan, all the way now to Jackson, Mississippi. You can go back as far as the levees in New Orleans. Now that you have all this money that has passed for infrastructure, you must spend the money in proportion to the need. You can't give the same proportion of money to Beverly Hills that you give Jackson, Mississippi, because Beverly Hills was not neglected. Jackson, Mississippi was. They were told for decades that that water system was not going to hold up. And they ignored it, and they never restored it. Now that it's broke down, it needs to be totally restored. There must be priority on the proportions that were neglected more than having it even and you taking care of everybody.
Then we say that, right? Because that's turning it to equity versus equality.
Exactly.
How are we getting equity out of these situations? And we went in with the demands that are at the forefront. I do want to double back even on the policing, because before, qualified immunity was like the big thing that caused conversations to kind of disappear. We saw Congress just going back and forth, even the special groups that were trying to come together to talk about it, and qualified immunity was that issue. Where are we there? Did you talk about that?
We talked about that, and again, as I said, he committed the day to reintroduce the bill, which qualified immunities in that bill. And I think that we were able to nail them down on commitments. Now we've got to be able to go out there to these candidates in these 8 weeks left and say, there's the commitment, you need to campaign on this. Otherwise, what are we saying to our people to come out and vote for? This is not a beauty contest. This is about political policy and political empowerment. And lastly, we wanted to deal with this whole question of inflation reduction, which a large part of that is climate change. Our communities are disproportionately the victims of the toxic waste dump. That's why our kids are 3 times more asthmatic than white kids, because we live in toxic zones. The money ought to be to remove toxic waste dumps out of our community and deal with environmental racism. So I thought it was a good meeting, but again, the devil's in the details and the follow-up, and we intend to stay on it and keep the administration feet to the fire. It is true, the alternative gives us nothing, but just because I have an alternative that is negative does not mean I don't expect to hold you accountable, because just like the alternative wouldn't give me anything, you can't stay there without me. So we're both in a situation that has to be respected.
Just a couple more questions. The first is, I saw the press conference that happened after with the civil rights leaders, and over and over I kept hearing that we're forging a new relationship, new partnership. And that word new kept coming, and I was trying to see what is the newness in this. So is it that you feel like that the president maybe doubled down more than before, because we're all seeing with what's at stake with the midterms like around the corner?
I think what is new is that he has stopped this, in my opinion, this convincing himself that he could do something bipartisan, and just realize that the Republicans are not going to work with him. So he needs to have a new alliance in his own base. And I think that's what's new. And I think if he gets more of a majority in the Senate, that's new, because his options change.
You now have a meeting with Vice President Kamala Harris on one of those topics is women's reproductive rights. Can you talk about that and what's the end game there? And then lastly, can we expect any more of these meetings to happen even before the midterms?
The meeting with Vice President Kamala Harris the Planned Parenthood and NARAL reached out to civil rights groups, and we all are going to have this meeting with her to raise the point that even beyond whether you agree with women having an abortion or not is not the issue. The issue is whether women should have the right to choose over their own body, and whether we're going back to states' rights to go back to a state by state deciding whether a woman has that right. Once we go back in a states' rights model, that's the model we fought the Civil War over around the Confederates. Some states saying we can have slaves, others saying we're free states. We cannot support a states' rights model. Remember now, the Supreme Court, Dobbs didn't say abortion is illegal. They said send it back to Mississippi and let them decide. They refused to say that they must give her the right. And they, in many ways, underscore states' rights. We're going to do what we can to fight and mobilize with those women rights groups for right to choose. And because we believe people ought to have a choice over their own bodies, whether you agree with the choice or not, it's still their choice. Even as a minister, God didn't say you had to go to heaven. He said you got a choice.
Choose you.
That's right.
Rep, thank you so much for coming on the record. It is always a pleasure to talk with you, state in the fight, and I look forward to talking to you again.
All right, Ebony. Great to be with you.
Thank you.